Welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, I'm going to be introducing the system of church modes. That is a series of scales that are kind of similar to, but a little bit different than our major and minor scales that we use for most music that we perform and listen to. If that sounds like something that you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. So let's talk a little bit about church modes. First, let's talk a little bit about how scales work. We know that most music that we listen to, most tonal music, is constructed using major scales and minor scales. We have two scales that can be transposed to any pitch level, so we can say things are in D major or D minor, E flat major or F sharp minor. And that tells us what pitches go into that composition. We can think of a scale as sort of being a collection of what pitches are available to us as we compose the piece. They also oftentimes carry with them the sense of hierarchy. That is, the scale degrees, the notes that are in the scale, have relationships to each other which point us towards a tonal center, which we call the tonic, or tell us how far away from that tonal center we are. So the major-minor tonal system, our system of major-minor scales that we use commonly for tonal music today, arose roughly the latter part of the 16th century, the late 1500s, and by the time we're talking about the early 1700s, the 18th century, we have most music being composed using major and minor scales. But we know that music is a lot older than that. So before we had this major-minor tonal system, we had a different system of scales that was used to organize most of the music that people performed and listened to, and that is the church mode system. The ecclesiastic modes, or church modes, first began to develop roughly around 900 AD, and they were used primarily up until about the mid-1600s, when they became increasingly replaced by the major-minor tonal system. But although we still do hear church modes used even today in some music, especially folk music, older musics, those sorts of things. The church mode system was created to organize a huge body of music. That is, we had a bunch of people who were all Roman Catholics who had to learn the Roman Catholic liturgy, which consists of literally hundreds and hundreds of songs, hymns, chants, all sorts of different pieces of music. And in order to make sense of this and to make it easier to learn and organize, some people began to organize them around the pitch collections that they used and the pitches that they ended on. That is, we call it the finalis, but we can think of it as sort of being kind of like a tonal center, although it's not quite the same thing. So they organized music using this system of church modes. We'll talk about exactly how that works in just a few minutes. And that system eventually began to expand and grow, and more modes were added, and different types of pieces were constructed using that, and they began to sound more and more like major and minor scales, till eventually the major and minor scales replaced the modal system altogether. So let's see how this modal system works, what are the scales that go into it, and how we can start to construct music, modern music, based on the old modal scale system. Let's begin by talking about the original modal system. The original modal system consisted of four pairs of modes. We had an authentic mode and a plagal mode, which had certain things in common. They had an affinity towards each other, and there were four pairs of those, and each one of those had what we call a final pitch. We can think of it kind of like a tonic pitch that was identical to its plagal or authentic partner. So for example, we had a mode that started on D and used all the white notes, the natural notes from D to D. And that was called the Dorian mode. That was the authentic mode, mode number 1, in the modal system. It also shared a final with its plagal partner, what we would call the Hypodorian mode, which had a final of D, but its range was shifted downward by a fourth. So the range spanned from A to A, but when the piece ended, the melody would have to get itself back down to a D. And that was the second mode, the Hypodorian mode. So notice that the authentic mode, the first mode, the Dorian mode, had a final on D, And its plagal partner, the hypodorian mode, had a final on D. The range of the Dorian mode spanned from D to D, but the range of the hypodorian mode spanned from A to A. Our third mode is the Phrygian mode, and the Phrygian mode starts on E and uses all the natural notes from E to E, and it sounds like this. So if we had a piece of music in the Phrygian mode, what we would do is use that pitch collection, but make sure as we were finishing up, we would come back down and we would end on that E. Its plagal partner is the Hypophrygian mode. So you're starting to see a pattern here. The authentic mode has just the name of, these names were taken from Greek tribes. There's an interesting story about how that happened. And then the plagal partner that goes with it is the name of the authentic partner with the prefix hypo put at the beginning. So the Hypophrygian mode has a range of B to B with a final on E. So it shares the same final as its authentic partner, but its range is B to B. And so when we end this Hypophrygian piece, we would have to end on the E. If we move up one more pitch and we have an authentic mode going from F to F, that is the Lydian mode, and its plagal partner, the Hypolydian mode, also has a range from C to C, which sounds a lot like a major scale, but the piece of music has to end on the final, which is F, just like its authentic partner. So the Hypophrygian mode has a range of C to C with a final of F. Finally, we have the Mixolydian mode, which goes from G to G, final on G. And its plagal partner, the Hypomixolydian mode, is a D to D pitch collection with a final on G. So you may be wondering, why don't we have authentic modes starting on C or on A or on B? Well, the simple reason is they didn't need them for the music that they were performing. They didn't have pieces whose finals ended on C or on A or on B, and further complicating things, they had modes whose ranges were C to C, that would have been the Hypolydian mode, or A to A, the Hypodorian mode, and B to B, the Hypophrygian mode. So those particular pitch collections weren't needed in the original modal system. To complicate things further, the pitch collection that could have started on B would have had a tritone, a very distant interval, between its final and the fifth scale degree, which musicians of the time felt was unsuitable for creation of music. So they stayed away from those three modes for a variety of reasons. Later on, in the mid-1500s, they started to expand on the modal system, mostly to recognize that the music that they were composing and performing was starting to use pitches in a broader way. And that's when a guy named Heinrich Glerian, a Swiss music theorist, came along and wrote a little treatise called the Dodecachordon, which classified all of the possible authentic and plagal modes. And in order to do that, he created a few new modes. And those were the ones that started on C, which he called the Ionian mode, which sounds an awful lot like our current major scale. And he created a plagal partner, the Hypo-Ionian mode, which would have been a pitch collection from G to G with a final on C. He also created a pitch collection from A to A, which we could call the Aeolian mode. And the Hypo-Aeolian mode, which would be a final on A, but starting from E to E. And then he also admitted that we could theoretically create a mode that starts on B, and he called that the Locrian mode, but he still wasn't willing to say that was suitable for composition of music, and so he still threw that one out as being something that we wouldn't typically use, something that's just theoretically possible. So our entire modal system consists of now C to C, the Ionian mode, D to D, the Dorian mode, E to E, the Phrygian mode, F to F, the Lydian mode, G to G, the Mixolydian mode, A to A, the Aeolian mode, and B to B, the Locrian mode. Now, I had said before that the tonal system, our major and minor scales, replaced the modal system. So from roughly 1600 all the way till about 1900, most of the music you heard, or you still hear from that time period, used major and minor scales. But the notion of modal scales never really went away completely. In fact, there are some great examples of modal pieces that you can find. Some of them are based on folk songs. Some of them are things that composers just wanted to play around with different pitch collections. So these modal pieces kind of survived in the background for quite a long time until in the 20th century, late 19th century to 20th century, we start seeing composers pick up these pitch collections as things that they can use to construct an entire piece of music. But they're going to think about it in slightly different ways. For example, the old modal system, as far as we know, we didn't really have the concept of a tonal center, a tonic pitch. We had all these pitches that we were able to use in a composition, but the only thing that really defined the sound of the mode was how we ended the piece, what pitch that piece ended on. That is, the pitches didn't necessarily have a hierarchy. We couldn't say that there was a dominant that had to go to a tonic like we do using the tonal scales. So when we start to resurrect the ancient church modes in a more modern way, we've been colored by the thinking, the tonal thinking that went on throughout the 18th and 19th centuries to such an extent that we now put on those pitch hierarchies onto these ancient pitch collections, which creates a very interesting way of thinking about these things. So one way, the way I described it before, we can start with our white pitch collection and our C major scale. All the white pitches creates an Ionian mode, and then D to D, scale degree 2 to scale degree 2 of C major, creates the Dorian mode. Scale degree 3 to 3 of C major creates the Phrygian mode. 4 to 4 creates the Lydian mode. 5 to 5 creates the Mixolydian mode. 6 to 6 creates the Aeolian mode, and 7 to 7 creates the Locrian mode. Well, that's one way to think about this. But it isn't always the most practical way, because if you start performing a piece that's in the Mixolydian mode and you start thinking about it in terms of I'm doing scale degree 5 to scale degree 5, it can create what we call a cognitive dissonance. That is, if I'm creating a tonal center, I clearly want that G to be my tonal center. However, if I'm thinking about a scale degree 5 to 5, I'm singing or playing scale degree 5 on that G. And so those two things don't line up particularly well with each other. So what we can do instead is we can start to think of our modes as being major or minor scales with specific pitches that have been altered in specific ways. Let's take a look at this. So another way we can think about these modes is as alterations to the major and minor scales that we know and love. So we don't have to alter the Ionian scale at all. That's just the same as a major scale. And we don't really have to alter the Aeolian mode at all, because that's just a natural minor scale. But notice that this is where we start to have some differences between the tonal scales and the modes. If I'm playing around with a minor piece of music, something that uses a minor scale, notice how I can raise that leading tone. I can also raise the 6th scale degree to promote the harmonic function underneath the music. In The Aeolian mode, I don't have those variable scale degrees. That is, I'm using the natural minor form of the scale. And so that seventh scale degree is a subtonic, a whole step below my final or my tonic, which creates that beautiful modal sound. You'll hear that frequently, especially in older music that has a minor sound to it. Now, my other modes, I can think of them simply as major or minor scales with altered scale degrees. So if I take a look at a major sounding scale, the Lydian scale, it sounds like a major scale with one changed scale degree. See if you can hear it in here. So the Lydian scale, of course, is F to F using all the natural notes. Now, if I play only natural notes from F to F, that fourth scale degree, where it should be a B flat in the key of F, now is a B natural that has a different sound. It sounds like a major scale with a raised fourth scale degree. And so I can use that then to create a major sounding piece with a little bit of difference to it. Likewise, so I take the other mode that has a major third above its final, the Mixolydian mode. It's the white note collection, the natural notes between G and G. So it sounds like a major scale, but my seventh scale degree has been lowered. So the major sounding modes are the Ionian, which is the same as a major scale, the Lydian, a major scale with a raised fourth scale degree, and the Mixolydian, a major scale with a lowered seventh scale degree. Taking our minor sounding modes, our Dorian scale sounds like the natural notes between D and D, and you'll notice that that sixth scale degree is a half step higher than what we expect in the natural minor scale. So our natural minor scale would be, and we raise that sixth modal degree, creating a Dorian mode. Our Phrygian scale is a natural minor scale in which we lower the second scale degree. So using our natural notes, it's E to E, so E, F natural, G, A, B, C, D, E, and notice how in a normal E minor scale we have an F sharp, but in an E Phrygian scale we have an F natural. And finally, Locrian. Poor Locrian, which kept on getting left out because it was unsuitable for writing music back in the old days. Well, composers in the 20th century, nothing's unsuitable. We can do whatever we want with the pitches we have available. So we can take a minor sounding scale and we're going to lower the second scale degree, just as we did with Phrygian. We're also going to lower the fifth scale degree. So it sounds like this. Whenever you lower that fifth scale degree or do anything with the fifth scale degree, it's going to create a much more unsettled sound. In fact, some people would say it sounds like 7 to 7 in a major key. So you have to work a little bit harder to create that sense of centricity around that, in this case, a B natural, to create that Locrianness about it. So our minor sounding church modes are the Aeolian, which is the same as a natural minor scale, our Dorian, which is a natural minor scale with a raised sixth scale degree, our Phrygian, which is a natural minor scale with a lowered second scale degree, and our Locrian, which is a natural minor scale with a lowered second and lowered fifth scale degree. Now, another difference between the original church modes and how they're used in modern times also arises from our concept of major minor scales, in that we can transpose any of our major minor scales to start on any pitch. And if you think of your modes as being derivations from these major minor scales, you can do the same thing to them. So for example, if I wanted to have a Mixolydian mode, my normal Mixolydian mode is the natural notes between G and G, which creates a major scale with a lowered seventh scale degree. Well, I could transpose that. I could start on any pitch and simply do a major scale and just lower the seventh scale degree. So if I wanted to start the scale on a C instead, I'm going to be doing a C major pitch collection, but I'm going to be lowering the 7th scale degree. So I'm going to have C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. And that suddenly creates a whole series of opportunities for placing these modal sounds in any range. So with that information, we can figure out how to spell the key signature for any mode and how to spell all the pitches in any mode, as long as we know which modes are based off of major scales and which ones are based off of minor scales. So it's just to review, it's a good thing to memorize this. The major sounding modes are the Ionian, which is just a major scale, the Lydian, which is a major scale with a raised 4th scale degree, and the Mixolydian, which is a major scale with a lowered 7th scale degree. The minor sounding modes are the Aeolian, which is just a natural minor scale, the Dorian, which is a natural minor scale with a raised 6th scale degree, the Phrygian, which is natural minor with a lowered 2nd scale degree, and the Locrian, which is natural minor with a lowered 2nd and lowered 5th scale degree. So memorizing that will help you write the key signatures and also help you play around with these very interesting pitch collections from which you can create some very interesting sounds. I'll create some more videos which go over each of the modes individually and what are the characteristics that make those modes sound really interesting and fun to use. But for now, let's just memorize that information before we move on to other stuff. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, please make sure you like it. Feel free to leave constructive comments below, and as always, make sure you subscribe to my channel for the latest music theory bites as they become available.